The busiest district in central Paris, Avenue Montaigne, was suddenly filled with security units dressed in formal black uniforms. All access to the area around Dior's main boutique was restricted. Traffic officers were deployed. Local police assumed standby positions. Yet no threats were detected. No state guests.
No diplomatic visits.
Only one confirmed reason on site: the presence of Park Jimin. Jimin, BTS member and global icon in art and fashion, arrived with tight security rarely afforded to non-political figures. At least 20 private bodyguards in tactical wear, plus Dior's internal security personnel, formed a perimeter formation as Jimin exited a black, unmarked armored vehicle. Silence blanketed the streets of Paris, yet the crowd of thousands who had waited since early morning did not move.
No screams. No sounds.
Only eyes fixed on one figure walking slowly toward Dior's entrance. All security actions were carried out under high operational standards. Surveillance drones were deployed above the boutique area. Storefront windows were coated with transparent bulletproof shields. Civilian scouts affiliated with private security firms were seen monitoring a 300-meter radius perimeter. These protocols were unusual, even by Paris fashion industry's famously strict standards. Internal sources stated the security level exceeded that usually arranged for heads of state visiting the Champs-Élysées. What was being protected? The question extended beyond Jimin's safety as an individual to the symbolic entity now attached to him. Dior no longer treated him as merely a brand ambassador. He had become a reputation infrastructure. The entire value of image, artistic strategy, and narrative direction of France's oldest fashion house is now directly linked to his figure. In that context, Jimin's public presence was not just a visit. It was a high strategic value activity, with symbolic risk Dior's image management could not tolerate. Thousands of fans from countries like Japan, South Korea, Germany, even Brazil stood in tightly packed but controlled formations. No signs of excessive euphoria.
No chaos.
This was no ordinary crowd. It was a mass concentration organized with high social discipline. Yet precisely for that reason, security protocols were intensified. A crowd too calm, in the context of a global figure with heavy symbolic weight, signaled potential anomaly. Not in the form of violence, but uncontrolled exposure. In fashion and image worlds, one gesture, one camera angle, or one split-second mistake can be a reputational disaster with global impact. Dior's bodyguards were not merely executing physical protection. This was a form of narrative control. Dior wasn't just protecting Jimin's body, but managing how that body appeared in public space. Cameras were banned, live streams blocked. Journalists on site were prohibited from taking images without permission. No major media outlet was given exclusive access. Dior took full control of all documentation channels. Every shot, every video, every camera angle, all curated directly by Dior's visual communication team. Jimin's presence included no reception, no speech, no press conference. He stood for less than 2 minutes in front of the main boutique door before entering an interior space entirely cleared of commercial activity. Dior had shut down boutique operations for a full 48 hours. Internal sources said the whole area was turned into a personal isolation zone. No journalists, no customers, no regular staff. Only one individual, one visual installation, and one fully controlled tactical security. What was Dior actually doing? By placing dozens of bodyguards for one figure, Dior sent the message they were no longer managing a star, but guarding a living artifact. Jimin was not treated as a regular human, but as a strategic asset with immeasurable cultural and commercial value. In business terms, this was protection of narrative ownership symbol. Public reaction was swift. Within 2 hours of Jimin's appearance, online searches for Dior Jimin soared by 600%. Traffic around Avenue Montaigne was rerouted. Medical officers were on standby at 2 points. Paris City Hall received over 300 public clarification requests from residents questioning the sudden road closure without prior notice. However, local authorities only called it a security procedure for a private event with cultural significance. Yet critical questions began to surface. Was all this necessary? Why was such heavy security granted to one individual, not in the context of threat, but of artistic exposure? Analysts in visual communication and cultural industry observers gave only one answer. This wasn't about physical safety. This was full control of perception. Dior was not protecting Jimin from the outside world. Dior was protecting the outside world from seeing Jimin in an uncontrolled state. Any public exposure without curation could endanger the absolute image shaped over the past year. In this narrative, perfection was not just an artistic goal, but a prerequisite for sustaining the narrative ecosystem. An official statement was released. No public explanation. Yet the entire system, from logistics, security, communications, to urban planning, was mobilized for one physical presence lasting only minutes. It marked a new precedent in the relationship between public figures and institutional structures. When one body requires head of state level protection merely to appear in public, we are no longer speaking of a person, but a symbolic entity with operational value beyond standard metrics. Now, following Jimin's Paris appearance, global brand strategy analysts are redrawing the standards of public figure communication. There is no longer room for spontaneity. No more concept of authentic image without systemic intervention. Dior, in its silent protection of Jimin, proved that they are not merely building fashion. They are constructing symbol power narratives that are fully controlled, down to every footstep and every gaze point. One thing has become very clear. Jimin is no longer just an artist's representation. He is territory. And like any strategic territory in geopolitics, his existence is tightly guarded, not due to threat, but because his value is too immense to be left exposed. When physical protection of an individual reaches extremes like Dior's actions for Jimin, what's at stake is no longer personal security. What is being locked is meaning. In a world where every visual appearance has financial, cultural, and symbolic consequences, Jimin's body becomes the battleground of all narratives. And Dior, as an institution deeply understanding modern public perception, leaves not a single inch of that space unmonitored. No detail was left uncontrolled. Jimin's access route to Dior's main boutique had been sterilized since the night before. Motion sensors and thermal scanners were installed at all access points. Security technicians from Switzerland were reportedly involved, not due to technical threats, but to ensure Dior's internal documentation systems were inaccessible externally. Every image appearing online after the event, when closely examined, all originated from one centralized visual distribution system.
No amateur anglès. No citizen recordings. No rogue documentation.
All curated. In this context, Jimin's presence was not only protected by bodyguards but by power over visual mechanisms themselves. Dior wasn't merely guarding his figure from direct contact. They managed how that figure is remembered. When thousands of fans crowded Avenue Montaigne's outer perimeter, they did not witness an idle waving or greeting. They witnessed a silenced phenomenon. Their collective awareness was forced to confront a performance that never fully happened. Jimin appeared, but did not speak. He was present, but did not touch. He existed, but could not be touched. And this is where the core power of this narrative lies, creating absolute distance between figure and public, not to evade, but to establish depth. Dior, with the tight security they built, did not separate Jimin from the public out of fear of the crowd. They created that boundary so the public would understand what they saw was no longer an artist one could approach, but an icon that could only be interpreted. Furthermore, this security also marks the transformation of fashion houses from mere luxury product producers into key actors managing public figures as ideological symbols. In this case, Dior did not act as protector, but curator. They not only managed physical security, but curated how the world constructs meaning from Jimin's presence. Each of his steps was not just movement, but narrative. Each silence was not emptiness, but message. And behind it all, a multi-layered security system ensured no disruption to the symbolic construct. A source familiar with Dior's management structure stated that Jimin's security is part of a new protocol applied only to individuals with architectural potential in public memory. Meaning, Dior no longer positions Jimin as a campaign driver, but as the cultural architecture foundation they are building, where his presence is the main structure, not decorative element. The fact that no product promotion occurred during this event further clarified that Jimin was not being used as a conventional commercial medium. He was the message itself. And thus, his protection extended beyond physical risk considerations. He is symbolic space, and any disturbance to his body is a disruption to the message system built with extreme structure and systemization. After his presence, the area once bustling with consumer noise transformed into a quiet zone full of questions. No sales announcements. No new collection launches.
No celebrity welcomes.
Only one brief appearance locked under layers of unusual security. And within 24 hours, the entire world was talking. What happened on Avenue Montaigne is not merely a celebrity phenomenon, but a total reconstruction of the relationship between the public body and the institutional structures that manage it. However, in this context, a critical question arises. Is the entire security and visual management apparatus surrounding Park Jimin a response to a real threat, or is it a narrative construction designed from the beginning for symbolic purposes? An extreme level of security typically reserved for heads of state was this time applied to an artistic figure. Does this reflect an evolution in how we understand the role of contemporary artists in the landscape of symbolic power? Or, conversely, is this an indication that the industry has now merged reality and simulation, presence and manipulation? If there was truly no threat, then why was Jimin's every movement locked down with a multi-layered international security system? Why were independent media silenced, documentation access strictly limited, and the entire narrative controlled by a single visual channel owned by Dior? Isn't this practice similar to propaganda operations, where imagery becomes a weapon and control of information a form of absolute power? We must ask further. Is Dior protecting a cultural asset or creating a mythology? Jimin remained silent, untouched by the public, and didn't participate in conventional commercial promotions. So, how does the public interpret his presence? Is Jimin truly present in a social sense, or merely presented as a fully curated visual illusion? The fact that no unfiltered documentation exists, not a single photo from civilians, no raw recordings, no ambient sounds, shows that Dior was not merely securing a body, but monopolizing interpretation. Is this a form of protection for the dignity of an icon, or a repressive act against the public's right to access reality? Moreover, the entire event has triggered a wave of public opinion across digital platforms. From TikTok to YouTube, from Twitter to private forums, the public is torn between awe and suspicion. But one thing is clear, this event is more performative than factual. Some even suggest that the entire narrative might have been entirely fabricated, not for protection, but to create a global sensation wrapped in symbolic silence. Is it possible that Jimin was never truly present in the physical sense as claimed? Could the visuals circulating merely be digital productions released by Dior to generate exclusivity and mass enchantment? If so, we are facing a new form of communication that no longer requires fact, but only systematically constructed impressions. It must be emphasized that most of the information about this event comes from unofficial media. Sources on TikTok, YouTube, and other social media platforms do show consistency in visual narrative, but contain no independent evidence or confirmation from credible journalistic institutions. Doesn't this imply that the public is not witnessing reality, but absorbing a story that has been mass broadcast and tightly constructed? In such a condition, we must not surrender to symbolic euphoria. We must ask, who benefits from this mystery? What hidden agenda lies behind the removal of public spontaneity? Why does this entire event feel more like a ritual of sanctification than a human interaction? And most importantly, are we witnessing reality or being manipulated into believing in a collectively constructed myth? Dior may have created a monumental moment in visual communication history. But was this moment born out of artistic honesty or from strategic calculation that eliminated the human aspect to maintain symbolic supremacy? Does Jimin himself still have control over his image, or has he become part of a narrative architecture beyond his control? We urge readers not to believe immediately. Information, no matter how convincing, must go through verification. Do not let emotion replace logic. Do not let virality replace truth. Amid the flood of information, skepticism is intelligence. Reconsider. Why was no journalist allowed to take photos? Why has no public eyewitness given a direct testimony? Why is the narrative too perfect to be natural? If we accept that a person's body can be completely controlled by a visual system, then we are entering a new phase, an era where meaning is stronger than physical presence. In this context, Jimin is no longer a subject, but the object of a highly systematic symbolic construction. And Dior, no longer a fashion house, but an institution that produces meaning. So, dear reader, ask yourself, is this reality or merely a story you wish to believe? Is this proof of visual art's glory or a critical point of visual freedom's decline? And ultimately, are we admiring an artist or worshiping the structure of symbolic power that has absorbed him? Reflect. Question. Do not remain silent. Because in silence, the system works unopposed. If we untangle the chain of events said to have occurred on Avenue Montaigne, then we are facing more than just the presence of a cultural icon. We are facing a structure of performance, where the spectacle is no longer action, but control. In this system, presence is not only controlled, but designed to become the center of imagination, not of reality. This raises a key question. Is this a form of strategic communication rooted in reality, or a hypervisual spectacle aimed at creating symbolic panic for the sake of virality? If it's true that no documentation comes from the public, then how can we verify that this event happened as claimed? If the narrative and visuals come from only one channel, Dior itself, doesn't that automatically eliminate the possibility of alternative truths? Where is the public's place in this? Are they only allowed to see according to the provided narrative? We are entering an era where facts are no longer merely events that occur, but events that are designed to be believed. So we must ask, does Jimin as an individual still hold authority over his body and meaning? Or has he become a living medium governed by institutions greater than himself? Jimin no longer appears as a human. He appears as an architecture of visual perfection. In the language of cultural economics, he becomes a media container, an entity where meaning is placed, circulated, but never touched. He becomes an untouchable structure, admired only from a distance. And this kind of power is far stronger than mere physical protection. It locks public perception into a single line of interpretation, that the presence of an icon must be sterile from all spontaneity. Did I ask this what we call progress? Or a regression of humanity into imagery? Certainly, some of the public will argue that this level of protection is normal for a globally impactful figure like Jimin. Yet even heads of state still allow for public interaction, at least in organic visual form. Here, there was none of that. Even visual interaction was controlled with extreme precision. So, are we witnessing the protection of a public figure or the military protocol of meaning? Dior not only restricted physical contact between Jimin and the public, they restricted the public's ability to interpret Jimin freely. Interpretation has been frozen, replaced by institutional narrative. And when interpretation is frozen, meaning becomes singular. This is the form of symbolic authoritarianism we must beware of, for when meaning is owned only by institutions, the public is no longer part of the cultural process, but merely consumers of narrative. Even more concerning, this phenomenon does not stand alone. We have seen similar tendencies in other global cultural events. From music concerts, movie premieres, to fashion launches, all have shifted from participatory occasions to closed visual systems with strict control. The public's role continues to shrink. And in this context, What happened in Paris might just be an early test to see how the public responds to the loss of spontaneity. The next critical questions are, will the public continue to accept communication forms that do not allow two-way interaction? Will we keep letting ourselves become silent spectators of a meaning show we didn't help create? Or will we start questioning again? Who shapes our perception? And who takes over our reflective space? This is where the urgency of critical thinking arises. In the post-truth era and visual manipulation, reality no longer appears as something we can experience directly. It appears as simulacra, images of images, reality of false realities, shadows of something that may never have truly happened. So, was Jimin really present on Avenue Montaigne as claimed? Or was this all a perfect spectacle woven by the global communication machine to create controlled frenzy? We are not saying that this event is a hoax, nor are we claiming it to be entirely real. We are merely stating the truth of this event has been confined, and the public is only handed a pre-selected key. Therefore, we invite you, the readers, to ask, are you seeing reality or merely believing a narrative? Are you in awe because of truth or because of a well-crafted scenario? Do you still possess the freedom to think, or have you been drawn into a meaning system controlled by external forces? We must return to the core, the awareness that every piece of information, no matter how viral, no matter how real-looking, must always be placed in an evaluative space. We must never rely on emotion as a verification tool, especially if all visual evidence and narrative are controlled by one institution with aesthetic and economic agendas. Truth is not what's most talked about. Truth is what remains after all narratives stop. And now, after reading all this, we ask, do you think this event is real? Or just a performance? Are you witnessing an event or witnessing the production of meaning? And most importantly, are you still thinking?